I think we've all seen the Vogue headline saying fashion is getting political again, or maybe I just think that because my circle of friends haven't stopped talking about it. But that's what we're going to be discussing today, because it definitely has garnered mixed responses and I have some very strong opinions about what they've written. So we should probably get into it. Before we do, just a quick welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, my name's Katie. I talk about culture and social media through the lens of fashion and sustainability. If that sounds good to you, then make sure you're subscribed here on the channel, and you can go follow me on other social media if you want. And with that, let's get into it. So the one thing we can guarantee without a doubt about fashion is that it's going to reflect the culture. And a big part of that culture is the political climate and the shifts of power currently going on there. Hence why recently we've seen a return of conservatism on the runways, just like we've seen it in society. We've seen success from heritage fashion brands when international relations have been a bit tricky, and why we've seen more messy, hedonistic, whimsical themes running throughout fashion and the online rhetoric, because everyone's looking for an escape right now. My point is that fashion holds up a mirror to the world, and right now the world is full of people sick of chaos and demanding change. So it makes sense to assume, and Vogue certainly did, that fashion is going to see that desire for change in society and manifest it by getting political again. The big example Vogue gave was fashion's ongoing reaction to the ICE situation in America. And I'm not going to argue with their summary that fashion seems to be appearing more political, especially when you compare it to how the industry has been notably quiet on key issues in the past few years. And any step now would feel like a big step towards progress. Saying that, I feel like writing an entire article under this headline is a little bit misleading. Saying fashion is getting political again implies actual decisive action on a brand's part to cool light to issues and rally for change. Actually taking a clear side of a debate, regardless of what that will do to your stock price. And I don't think that's what fashion has done here. And that's what we need to talk about. Let's start by talking about the problem with Vogue's example. Like I said, Vogue's article relies on fashion's reaction to the ongoing ICE issue happening in America, and very specifically what happened at the Grammys, referencing the celebrities who used their acceptance speeches to speak out against this issue and the designers that had dressed them in the same breath. They noted how a lot of celebrities condemned what was happening on stage, a lot of them wore ice out pins, but doing so whilst wearing designer, and implied that that was somehow a big political move on fashion's part. But it's pretty clear that these were the actions of individuals, not brands, and that the fashion brands wouldn't have had much to do with what celebrities clipped to their outfits after they'd been dressed, or the words that came out of their mouth when they were accepting awards. In fact, I feel like fashion's removal from the entire thing is kind of proven when you go to the Instagram posts of the brands who dress the major winners of the night and see that there's zero reference to anything other than what the celebrities are wearing. Schiaparelli didn't choose to reference Bad Bunny's speech or put any video of Bad Bunny's speech in their post about what he was wearing on the night. Same goes for Chanel when they posted about Olivia Dean's outfit. Same for Hodakova, who dressed Billie Eilish. So if we were to look at Vogue's big example of fashion getting political from that perspective, it seems kind of flimsy, no? Sure, celebrities were wearing designer when they spoke out about big issues, but the designers had nothing to do with that. And they didn't feel like it was an important enough detail to immortalize in the celebratory Instagram post. Granted, this kind of outfit details only Instagram post is very industry standard, but standard does not mean moral, especially when it's a deliberate choice for a brand not to mention the biggest talking point of the night that is affecting millions of people in America right now. And I think such a hollow example is not something you would expect for the big thing Vogue is using to convince us brands care now. Vogue's justification for the Grammy example was that celebrity speaking out allows fashion brands to speak out, or at least look like they're speaking out, that it provides a language and sets a tone that brands can then follow along in their own messaging. But to me, that just sounds like hiding behind a big name and hoping that their political stance, they're sticking their neck out for something they believe in, will reflect well enough on you that no one notices you haven't said anything yourself. The political by proxy tactic that Vogue is basically co-signing here for fashion is not good enough, and it's something other creators have noticed fashion doing too. Ashantéa Austin, content creator and editor of The Face magazine, did a reel recently talking about things she'd noticed happening at Fashion Week, and the caption was "someone needed to say it." And towards the bottom of the list, she put, "A lot of brands have political undertones this season without actually saying much about what's going on in the world. Speak up." And this is it. This is what's feeling performative to me. It seems like brands are taking on a political undertone without actually speaking clearly about what it is they're standing up for, taking a political undertone without actually saying something direct, reflecting the culture without actually addressing the culture is such a fashion industry thing to do. If refusing to put a clear statement out about which side of the aisle you stand on is political, if dressing a celebrity and then letting them be the ones to say something important is political, then sure, fashion's getting political. Staying vague is safe. At least it is for the brands who are ruled by shareholders and market price and can't afford to offend anyone on either side of the aisle. I actually got a comment from one of my subscribers that explains this entire point. When fashion is art, art is political, but mainstream fashion, not really. And I'm going to go ahead and finish what's not said there, that mainstream fashion is not political because it's not art, it's consumption. And consumption and overproduction and all of those capitalistic forms of fashion is ruled by market price and shareholders rather than standing up for something that's actually important. It's interesting that I've seen other big fashion creators talking about these issues too this season. It all seems to be coming to a head, particularly because of what's happening in America. But it's also felt like the rumblings about fashion staying out of politics have been brewing for a while now. As Brenda Hashtag put it in other words on her Instagram, fashion often gets away with being apolitical because fashion as an industry is not taken seriously by a lot of people. Saying it's just clothes is a great way to shrug off accountability about things that actually matter. But like she points out, and also like Data But Make It Fashion points out in her post, whether brands like it or not, whether they want to take a stance or not, the people buying their clothes, and especially the people making their clothes, are affected by these issues. And fashion shouldn't simultaneously be allowed to avoid and profit off this reality, which again is hard when fashion's MO is not taking a stance on anything at all in order to offend the least amount of people and therefore keep them as customers. But like we've been saying, the price of that is just too high. I do want to be fair here and examine the entire fashion industry, not just this Vogue article. And so far, my argument has been very one-sided, very focused on what Vogue has said has been the examples. So maybe it's a good time to take a step back and examine when fashion has got political. None of this Grammy stuff, but like concrete examples of fashion actually sticking their neck out. The Vogue article did briefly mention this, but fashion did more than just dress the people speaking out against ICE. In fact, a few of them got involved in the national strike that happened recently. Some of them donated a percentage of the sales they made that day. And designers like Marc Jacobs put out an Instagram story about how to get involved in the strike. We also had what happened last year, where fashion staged a Get Out and Vote rally right before New York Fashion Week, led by Anna Wintour herself. This was a pretty big moment, included some pretty big faces that Anna invited along, but notably there was no overt message about who you should vote for, just that you should get out and vote. And again, there's that neutrality coming in. But one of the biggest examples of fashion doing away with that neutrality was in 2022, when the Russian invasion of Ukraine led to many fashion houses leaving Russia, ceasing their operations there, and slowly pulling away from the country. Of course, you had brands selling through back channels, and you had luxury brands that refused to leave such a big market. But for a lot of fashion brands, that was a pretty clear stance. And then if we go what feels like way back to 2020, you have the Black Lives Matter movement, where a lot of fashion signaled their support in smaller and bigger ways, from a tiny black square on Instagram to For Once Just Don't Do It campaign. So 4 big examples in 6 years that I could think of that really stuck out to me where fashion was getting political. And I think it's worth pointing out for the next part of this video that in all 4 of these issues, fashion was getting involved in something that they had no direct control over. Yes, okay, they all directly or indirectly impacted the customer base, the economics, the runnings of the business, but they weren't an issue caused by and directly influenced by the fashion industry. And that's another thread that I think we need to pull in this entire debate. Because fashion addressing imbalances inside its industry is even more rare than it talking about something happening outside. In fact, when I tried to come up with examples of political issues fashion directly controls and has taken a meaningful stance on, I quickly ran out of them. The first, I'm not even completely confident to call a political issue, but the banning of exotic fur and animal skins we've seen after decades of campaigning does seem to have drawn a line in the sand for the industry, and a lot of brands have been flocking to the issue. Obviously, of course, it started with smaller brands making the case first, and then we had the bigger brands dragging their feet, the individual fashion weeks dragging their feet, until now we've gotten to the point where it's a lot more common. And political or not, I think is a pretty good example of fashion bowing to the ethics of a situation. The second example was fashion's reaction to the Kyoto Accords and fashion's impact on the environment being brought to light. Initially, we had a lot of brands then scrambling to make environmental promises to deliver things by 2030. But this example isn't exactly one of hope, since we've seen exactly how much brands have been dropping off and pushing back progress in recent years. The third example is, I think, the strongest, and that's fashion's response to protect the dolls. Transgender representation in fashion is as much an issue as it is in the wider culture, and things like Connor Ives' Protect the Dolls t-shirt was a real moment for fashion to step up and increase awareness of how important representation can be. And on the backs of that, there's been a lot of progress, like transgender representation improving on the catwalk slowly, and big names like Alex Consani winning Model of the Year. However much I hate to say it, I do think there's a caveat to all of these examples. I'm not commenting on the motives of individual brands and designers here when I say that fashion as a whole tends to align their public messaging to what's currently most accepted by society. Big fashion, especially. And that's why it's dangerous to issue blanket statements like fashion cares about transgender issues or fashion is getting political again without digging into the context and looking at exactly who is doing that work. Connor Ives is just one small brand, an independent brand at that, not backed by a conglomerate, not backed by a billionaire. He was the one to bring massive awareness to the transgender rights issue, and we somehow translated that into a sign that all of fashion cared about the issue. But I think it's fair to say that a lot of the hype, a lot of the coverage, a lot of the attention from other brands came because it was a topic being discussed more broadly in society as a whole. And there were many famous faces already speaking out about the issue and trying to cause awareness, just like what's happening with ICE now. And it's only when society moves on to the next issue that you can see if fashion truly cares about what it was saying or if it was just reacting to the cultural zeitgeist. I think case in point for this is the decline of size inclusivity on the runways and in fashion as a whole. At a time when size inclusivity was a big thing, fashion was pushing as much diversity and inclusivity out onto the runways as possible. But now that the culture is leaning into skinniness and repression and conservatism, we're seeing a sharp decline in that inclusivity. It all comes down to the fact that reflecting the cultural zeitgeist equals profit, and profit makes people happy. So for brands, hopping around issues that are currently being discussed and hiding behind celebrities who can say what they want as part of their personal brand is a much safer tactic than digging your heels in on one thing and being known for that, making actual progress in that, because what if no one's listening? It also kind of goes without saying that it's much easier for fashion to address things that fall outside their jurisdiction because they have almost zero accountability for it. Yes, they can call people to vote, and that takes maybe an hour out of their day, but calling for something like better environmental standards for fashion means that you're going to be the one to actually have to make those standards better. And that's a lot of work. Again, I want to be fair, so I do want to give an example of when a brand actually has done this, put their money where their mouth is, talked about and made a stance on something that they directly control. And that example is what Prada has just chosen to do. Cut supplies with 222 of their Italian suppliers after labour violation allegations came out. That's an actual action Prada has taken on an issue they directly control. Almost decidedly costly for the brand, but it's an integrity move. They've put ethics and politics above profit. Yes, if you're cynical like me, you could say a big part of this motivation is probably avoiding PR fallout if this were to get out and people were to see they'd done nothing. But it's still big. It's still action. I think with those examples in mind, seeing how complicated they are, how different motivations can come across differently, it will be useful to have questions or a checklist you could go through when a brand seemingly makes a political statement, so we can get an idea about whether it's performative or actually progress. So the next time someone asks you whether a brand is getting political again or simply trying to look like they are, this is what I want you to ask. 1, are they hiding behind the face of a celebrity, using their language, their tone of voice to hide any actual stance of their own? I think that should help decide whether it's an actual move from a brand or whether they're just swept up in someone else's movement. 2, are they getting political in a meaningful way, making firm statements about their stance to their Instagram grid or offering funding to an issue, not just general statements on their Instagram story or dressing a celebrity? 3, Are the big names in fashions the ones stepping away from their neutrality? Or are they hiding behind the smaller labels and the independent ones who don't have to answer to their shareholders? And 4, are they addressing the parts of the issue that they have direct control over? Or are they just happy taking stances on things that they're removed from and therefore don't have any accountability for? The last section of this video probably should have come earlier, but I think we should briefly talk about whether fashion should be political or not. We can't end the video without talking about the performativeness of politics in fashion. I know we've kind of skirted around the issue this entire time, but it's time to actually address it. Is it actually necessary for every brand to have an established opinion on every single issue? Or does that kind of end up with the entire thing becoming marketing? And yes, I am kind of thinking of that Bo Burnham sketch where he says something like, "Will you help wheat thins raise awareness?" or something like that. I think going back to the Vogue article, because that's what's inspired this entire thought process and the entire video, it's important context to know that the article is written to industry professionals. It's not written to outsiders like you and me, but the people who are in charge of making stakeholder decisions. And it cautions them against what could be a lose-lose situation if the big brands they're in charge of get political. And I do think they make some good points when they're explaining that argument, like the fact that a lot of brands are international, so getting involved in the national issues of a country like America, even though it's big and big culturally, could look weird, could look performative, even if they're trying to do something good. But what I think they miss is that not getting involved is a decision in itself. It's not the neutrality they think it is. I think going back to what Brenda Hashtag put in her post kind of explains this. An industry that shapes culture, aspiration, and identity and profits off it, just like it profits off diversity, doesn't get to opt out. We've seen what impact fashion can actually have on an issue when they bother to put their considerable resources to solving it. And performative or not, if the net result is achieving progress, then who cares about the motive? Anyway, that was my response to Vogue's "is fashion getting political again" argument. I didn't mention everything they mentioned, I did just pick out the key parts. So if you wanted to go read it in full before you respond in the comments, then I fully support that. But yeah, I thought we needed to have this additional context, this discussion about whether fashion is or isn't making a stance on things outside of a very biased fashion publication. So I hope you liked it. I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments. And if you aren't subscribed to the channel, then please do so if you enjoyed this. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll speak to you really soon. Bye.